Good morning, everyone. We are coming to you live via Facebook streaming, via YouTube streaming, and also via Skype. Rabita continues. Prayer is the womb. Prayer is the womb. And I will give birth to God through my prayers. Through my prayers, I will make him alive. Such is Sufi approach. The Austrian poet, whose most of the composition is in German language, Rilke, is really reflecting the very heart and essence of Sufism. And this is how poets and mystics have always felt. We go on doing it. We will go on creating God. In fact, let us not call this creation, because instead of creation, this is a revelation. Revelation, remember, for one who prays, and the person for whom God is revealed for the first time. It looks like creation. And for the person for whom God is created for the first time, it looks like it's a creation. It appears as if prayer has created it. In fact, prayer does not create, instead it reveals something to you. It removes the thick layer of dark haze from your eyes. It removes the thick layer of dark haze from your eyes. Your heart begins to pulsate and you fall in harmony with the whole. And suddenly, God is revealed. It is there. Prayer is naive. It is waiting for someone who never comes. Prayer is naive. It is waiting for someone who never comes, asking for someone or something that is not there. Not at least now. If there be a God who loves man, let him speak now. There is another poet, Seneca, who in his tragic composition says, the powerful heart is saying, I am speaking to you, I am provoking you, are you there? Just give me a slight hint. A small word is enough. A tiny gesture will do. Are you there? And you continue to shout to the skies. Even then there is no response. All your prayers disappear into nothingness, and there is no response from the other shore. Yet still prayer goes on transforming you. Yet still prayer goes on transforming you. The effect of prayer becomes invisible. It may not change the reality. It may not change the reality outside you, but it will go on changing you. Remember, it may not change the reality outside you, but it will go on changing you. You will become softer and softer. You will become more feminine, and one day you have really melted. One day you have really melted when you are no more solid, no more hard like a rock. When you are a flow, a simple flow, the response comes. The response comes not from the other shore, instead from the deepest or the innermost core of your being. Response never comes from the other shore. It comes from the deepest core of your being. Really, that alone is the other shore. What is the other shore? the deepest or the innermost core of your being, your inner depth. And before that happens, you will be the link between this shore and the other shore. Before that happens, you will be the link between this shore and the other shore, and such link is Master. Such link is Sheikh. And to ask for a perfect Master is utterly ignorance, because to be a Master implies totally. To be a Master implies totality. Replace the word perfect with a total, with the word total. Do not look for a perfect Master, instead look for someone who is total. A Master is total. If he does not look total to you, then you seem to have a certain idea of perfection, and that he is not going to fulfill. A Master never fulfills your criteria. A Master never fulfills anybody's idea. He lives his own life, but one thing remains certain: he lives in total harmony. Total harmony, both within and without. Forget it not. When I use the word perfect, I only use in some sense of completion. And I was not using in the word in your sense, in your understanding, or in the dictionary meaning of the word perfect. Whatever a Master does, he is totally in it. You would have heard the name of Raman Maharishi. He was a silent sage, but he used to get angry at times, and people were intrigued by his anger. When I say he used to get angry, he was pure anger. There was no contamination. It happened. One day a scholar came and started asking unnecessary questions. And all the questions lacked intelligence and relevance. All the questions lacked intelligence and relevance. There was no relevance whatsoever of any kind. And all the questions he went on asking. Raman listened. His questions were very long, and often he quoted scriptures to support his questions. This is what many do. And Raman repeatedly told him to please meditate, and said the only thing for you to do is ask the question, who am I? No other question is relevant. No other question will take you far. But the man continued to engulf in his ignorance, would not listen at all, and he went on and on. Suddenly the disciples could not believe. Raman took his staff, the walking stick, and rushed the man. And the man became so frightened that he escaped from the room. Raman followed him to the very gate of the ashram, but he returned laughing. Someone gathered courage and said, "But you were angry." And Raman responded, what he said is beautiful. Look at the perfection of it all. Look at the perfection of it all. If you have any idea that Master never gets angry, then you would be in great difficulty. If you have an idea that Master should not look worried, then you have difficulties with Krishnamurti. Krishnamurti always or very often he would look worried. He has no worries of his own. He becomes worried for you. He goes on saying one thing and people would not understand, and they go on persisting with their ignorance. With this, Krishnamurti would get angry, and people around him had problems in accepting him as a perfect master. Many times people come and ask the questions to clarify such matters. A master does not have anything of his own to be worried about. He is always worried for the sake of the seekers, for the sake of the disciples. He is always worried for the sake of the disciples. And the very idea of perfection is the creation of your mind. Mind continues to think that the master should be like this or that. Master is not like anyone else. He is just himself, and one thing is always certain, true, that whatsoever he is total. Whatever he is doing, he is totally in it. He is never partial or fragmentary. If he is angry, his anger is total. If he loves, he will be total again. Totalness or totality is the quality of an awakened one, of a master. This is what I mean by perfection. I use the word perfection in the sense of the word totality. All masters are perfect, so never search for a perfect master. And now let me take to the parable. A certain man wanted to seek a perfect master. He read many books, visited sage after sage, listened, discussed, and practiced, but he always found himself doubting, and he was unsure. After 20 years, he met a man whose every word and action corresponded with the idea of a totally realized man, the idea that he had. Totally realized man. Introspect over this parable. Now let me give you the explanation. Certainly this man had been carrying a certain idea within him for 20 years. 20 years he had been carrying the idea, he had conclusions, he knows what a perfect master is. He is looking for a living photograph as a master, one who fits with his idea. It is the idea of the perfect master, and now somehow someone has to fit into it. An idea is there and someone has to fit into that idea. This is ego. This is not humbleness. This is in no way how a disciple acts or should act. This person is not a real seeker as yet. He is functioning through a conclusion. And more so, he has already decided his conclusions are right. How can you conclude? How can your conclusions be right? And if at all your conclusions are right, then you yourself too seem to be the perfect master. You want to know, want to judge a cardiologist? How can you do that? Unless you are an expert yourself, you do not have any criteria to know what a cardiologist is supposed to be. The only thing is this: you may see some certificates hanging over his wall, and from that you can guess. Time flowed on, search continued, and then suddenly after 20 years he met a man whose every word and action corresponded with his idea of a totally realized man. After 20 years of search and wandering, suddenly he met a man whose every word and action corresponded with his idea of a totally realized man. It must be a coincidence though. Sometimes such things do happen. The journey has to continue so. The traveler lost no time. You, he said, seem to me to be the perfect master. If you are, my search, my journey is at an end. Such is the way of an ignorant one who considers him to be wise. Such people are in abundance. They are available dollar a dime. They are available dime a dozen. Observe the statement, the word if is there in this statement is still. He still says if you are. He is not sure. In spite of all knowledge that he claims to have, doubt still persists. Hence the statement, if you are. Also it is because of his conclusions about the perfect master is the outcome of ignorance. You will find people around you saying and asking such things. I have to look for a real master. I wonder if this master is really good. I do not like this one or that one. People arrive at such conclusions out of their ignorance and make comments. You cannot see and feel the flame and yet still want to conclude. The candle is lit in front of you. Its incandescence is there, the warmth is there, and yet still you are lost in your ignorance. Master is the pulse of the cosmos. Master is the pulse of the cosmos, and when conclusions are the outcome of ignorance, then trust cannot arise. All conclusions are outcome of ignorance, then trust cannot arise. And if you cannot find anyone who corresponds with your idea of a perfect master, and when conclusions are the outcome of ignorance, trust cannot arise. And if you cannot find anyone who corresponds with your idea, he cannot be a master for you. And when you find someone who corresponds, that too just by coincidence, now the doubt arises. Maybe your idea is right, maybe it is not. Hence this statement is there. You seem to me to be the perfect master. You seem to me to be the perfect master. And if you are, my journey is almost complete, the search is concluded. The disciple continued. The journey is complete, the search is concluded. The master responded, I am indeed. Listen to his words. I am indeed. I am described by that name. I am described by that name, responded the master. For master, for an awakened one, these are simply the names. Call him a Buddha, an enlightened one, a Christ, a Messiah, a Nanak, a Zarathustra, a Lao Tse, a perfect master, a Krishna. Nothing matters. These are just names for identification. Maybe these are the names given by the people. These are the names needed by the people. To someone, Messiah is the correct name. To some next one, Buddha is the correct name. To someone else, Holy Prophet is the correct name. All words are meaningless. What is more important, the master needs not these. He has arrived home, and that's most important. He has arrived home. all words are meaningless. He has to come to that silence where words do not exist. Master is that silence where words do not exist. He has come to that silence where words do not exist. To that wordless silence he has reached. To that wordless silence he has reached. To that wordless silence he has reached. The Master is that silence where words do not exist. Like a gentle breeze he comes, vibrates the inner chord of your beings, and suddenly vanishes in the unknown oblivion. Like a gentle breeze he comes. Like a gentle breeze he comes. Like a gentle breeze he comes, suddenly vibrates your inner strings, and then he disappears in the unknown oblivion. If you are, he is not sure. In spite of all knowledge that he claims to have, doubts still persist, and the statement, if you are. So the man confirms the statement of the person, yes, indeed, I am described by that name. Observe this statement. Described by that name. He is not saying, he does not say that I am that or I am not. He only says people describe me by that name. People recognize me by that name. However, the man is not yet disciple. One should seek or ask how to be a disciple instead of asking about the Master. One should search for the disciple within him. The moment you search the disciple with him, which is the first step, and when the disciple is ready, the Master appears. This man has not searched the disciple in him, but he wants the Master to accept him. The Master continued. That, said the Master, I cannot do. It is simple, because while you may desire the perfect Master, and what about him? What about the Master? A perfect Master in turn requires only the perfect disciple. A perfect Master in turn requires only the perfect disciple. You are searching for the perfect Master. You are using all your criteria, conclusions to decide about a perfect Master. He should look like this, he should talk like this. All these are your conditions. But Master, an awakened one, does not fulfill your conditions. A man came to Buddha. He said, I am an atheist and I know you do not talk about God, you do not believe in God. What do you say? Buddha says, only God is. All around there is God. The man did not get the confirmation of his conclusion. He went back. Another man came, he said, I am a believer of God. What do you say? Buddha said, there is no God. God has never been. A contradictory statement. Third person came, he said, I know nothing. I am inquisitive. I am in search. Some say there is God, others say there is no God, there is confusion. But I know, seeing in your eyes, I know that you have the answer. Buddha said to sit down in meditation. Sat down. After the meditation, he bowed down to Buddha and said that in your company I got the taste of that which is. Anand was watching all this. He said, what is all this? The first man you said, there is God all around. To the second one, to the same question, you said there is no God. And the third, Buddha said the first one was an atheist. He did not want anything. He simply wanted a confirmation from me that Buddha also says there is no God, so that he can continue his business. The second one was a believer. He wanted my confirmation. And the third one was an innocent one, who is not bothered about whether God is or not. Such is the state of the Master. 20 years search wasted in a flash. 20 years of energy brought no result because the whole search was wrong. When the first step is wrong, the final step is bound to be wrong. How can that be right then? And the Master is right. If you are seeking for a perfect Master, then what about him? He cannot waste his treasures. He cannot waste his treasures. You have gathered some precious message, precious wealth. Would you like to squander it or waste it for unnecessarily? No, you will look for the genuine person who is worthy of it. When Bodhidharma went to China in 6th century AD, the king of the Wu dynasty invited him. He was like any other person, thinking that opening the monasteries, schools, colleges, all these charitable works is the divine work. So he asked Buddha, I have opened so many schools, monasteries, and so many people are being fed and all that. What is the outcome of all that? Bodhidharma said, you will not get the place in the 7th hell even. This embarrassed the king. He said, that is how I am. If you want, I will be there, otherwise I will go in search of the one for whom I have come. I have not come here for you. You may have invited me, but I have come for someone else. 9 years Bodhidharma remained facing the wall. Then a man named Huineng came and he stood behind him. And he said, Bodhidharma, turn your face towards me, otherwise I will cut off my hand. There was no response. Time flowed on. Then one day the man said, turn your face towards me, otherwise I will cut off my head. Bodhidharma said, now something can be done. Cutting off the hand, what does it mean? It is symbolic. Cutting off the hand means I am ready to work for you. Whatever you ask me, the service, this and that. And service is not, it is a social work. If you cannot do anything, do that. But the more precious is the inner work. And cutting off head means whatsoever conditioning, whatsoever belief system, whatsoever you have stored in your memory, in your mind, that has not helped you in any way. You have to cut off that. And when he said, I am ready to cut off my head, then Bodhidharma said, something can be done. 20 years wasted in a flash, 20 years energy brought no result. Hence the whole search was wrong. And when the first step is wrong, how can the final step be right? And the Master is right. If you are seeking for a perfect Master, then what about him? He cannot waste his treasures. He requires a perfect disciple, one who has trust, one who seeks not knowledge. So the Master says, go and first become perfect. It may sound harsh, but sometimes Master's compassion flows like this in a hard way. 20 years wasted, no gain, no all in vain. And the Master is right. Master is right when he says, what do you think? If you want a perfect Master, then perfect Master also wants a perfect disciple. Go and become perfect first. Go and be a disciple first. Generally, everyone thinks disciplehood is meaningless and there is no need to be a disciple first. Everyone is seeking for a master and people comment. The master does not go to the disciple. It is a mutual search, and some says that if you say the master chooses you, that what about my free will? You are putting your knowledge of the outer world for the inner world. There is no need to be a disciple first. Everyone seeks a master. It requires a great discipline to become a disciple. It requires a great discipline to become a disciple. The two words, disciple and discipline, means the same thing. Both come from the same root, meaning capacity to learn. Do you have the capacity to learn? This man who is seeking a perfect master is incapable of learning anything. And 20 years he went on moving with this conclusion or that. He has not learned the basic thing during these 20 years. During this period of 20 years, certainly he would have come across many masters. But all along his conclusions came in the way. He had already concluded the masters should look like this. He trusted his conclusion more than those who he came across. The reason is that he had read much. This is the obstruction. Also whatever you have read beclouded his vision. And now he says, because you seem to correspond to my idea, and I think you are a perfect master. Not that you are a perfect master. He says that I think you are a perfect master because you fulfill the criteria that I have. Now you correspond to my conclusions. How can you decide? And what qualifications do you have to judge a master? The number of disciples is the criteria. His reputation is the criteria. The social status or the miracles that he performs is the criteria. If you are capable of judging a master, that will simply mean that you are a master yourself. If you are able to judge a master, that means you are a master yourself. If you can judge the thesis, the work of a MD, that means you have that qualification. You don't need to come to this MD. And the people who are allowed to be the judge, to declare that you are qualified, are experienced in that field. If you are capable of judging a master, that will simply mean you are a master. And remember, two masters do not judge one another. Each master has a role to perform. The existence wants master to work at different levels. Each master works at a different level and they do not contradict one another. If they contradict, there is something wrong with it. And you will have the experience whenever you ask a master about someone else, he does not say anything. And in this process, master also grows. How can you be decisive? You do not know from where you have gathered all this information, from books or from conclusions or from arguments or from discussions. All such things are borrowed. In your ignorance, you have gathered all kind of nonsense. Generally, people gather information from books, and the fact that you can read the books, but understanding is altogether a different matter. You can read Bhagavad Gita, but to understand is a totally different matter. Naturally, you understand only through your ignorance. You can read a book on anatomy, but you cannot understand, because the book on anatomy written by Thomas Gray is written in English language and you are conversant in English language. Can you understand the book of anatomy? The book of anatomy has its own language, its own, although it is written in English language, but it has its own dictionary. It has its own, each word has its own meaning. And you cannot understand that. You can read a book on anatomy like a novel, but you cannot understand it. And if you can understand that, that means you are expert in that. Each discipline has its own terminology, language, etc. And when it comes to understand the message of a Jesus, a Buddha, or a prophet, is altogether a different matter. It is like a primary school student trying to interpret Albert Einstein. Each discipline has its own terminology, language, etc. And when it comes to understand the message of a Jesus, a Buddha, a prophet, is altogether a different matter. It is like a primary school trying to understand, trying to interpret an Albert Einstein. The Holy Quran is the fragrance of the flower that Holy Prophet is. Holy Quran is not in the verse. It is the fragrance of the flower that Holy Prophet is. To understand the scripture, you need the heart and level of consciousness of the Holy Prophet. How can you understand the message of Holy Gita? To understand the message of Bhagavad Gita, you need the consciousness of Krishna, not the language, not the mastery on the Sanskrit language. If you have consciousness, then you do not need to know even the language. You can understand the fragrance of a Krishna or a fragrance of a holy prophet. A man in his ignorance is almost like a child. What idea such a person has of perfection, of a master or God? All your ideas are childish. Biological growth does not correspond with the growth of understanding. Biological growth does not correspond with the growth of understanding. Psychologists say men grow only biologically, while their mental capabilities do not grow beyond the age of 5-year-old child. Psychologists say that man grows only biologically, but their mental capabilities do not grow beyond the age of 5-year-old child. You will go on understanding only that which you can understand. You will go on understanding only that which you can understand. Words are just empty, and you have to provide your meaning to it. Words do not have any meaning. The same word in anatomy has a different meaning than in physiology, than in psychology, than in religion. It all depends on what meaning you are going to assign to them. Whenever you see something or read, always you give your meaning. It cannot be otherwise. All interpretations are yours. People go on reading books and scriptures and continue to gather rubbish. When you quote a Bible or a Quran or a Bhagavad Gita, you are simply quoting yourself. Someone likes the law of karma. So to him, Bhagavad Gita, he finds only that meaning in it. I have heard 6 blind men went in search to get the concept of an elephant. One got hold of his trunk. The next got hold of his ears. The third got hold of his legs. Next one got hold of his tail. And each tried to describe, and there were 6 different interpretations. One who got hold of the tail, he said that the elephant is like a rope. The next one who got hold of the legs, he said elephant is like a pole. One who got hold of his ears, he only understood, his knowledge was limited up to the fan. He said his elephant is like a big fan. It is, and this always happens. When a scripture is translated into another language, much changes. It happened in case of Bible. Jesus spoke Aramaic language. When it was translated into Hebrew, in the process it was translated from Hebrew to Greek and finally into English. From Armenian language that Jesus spoke, it was translated into Hebrew, and from Hebrew to English, and from English to other language. In this process, original fragrance was lost. You can do simple experiments. You smell a flower when it is picked up from the plant. Let the flower change hands and pass through 10 people. You smell the flower when it reaches you back. Its fragrance will certainly change. The book of John 8:24 reads, I am he, ye shall die in your sins. Except ye believe that I am he, ye shall die in your sins. But here the word he is not found in the original manuscript at all. Earlier translators were in trouble by the absence of the object in a sentence, and they assumed something was missing, so they changed the statement. Except ye believe that I am. This is the original statement. Except ye believe that I am. This is the original statement. And the translator believe that I am he, I am God. I am he, I am God. Thus the immense beauty of the original statement is lost. The Bible still reads the same way. Jesus is simply saying I am, and this I amness is the very quality of the existence. Jesus is not saying I am God, because if you say I am God, then you have already accepted the duality of God and you. If you say God is, that means you are there and God is there. Because if you say I am God, then you have already accepted the duality of I and God, and then M only bridges the gap. I am God. And when Jesus says I am, and this I amness is most important, he is simply saying you can call it God or you can call it as I. It is indeed the same thing, just two ways of saying the same thing, the same expression. When Moses met God on the mountain top, he asked, "People will ask me about you. How can I say something about you?" And he said, "Just go and tell them that God said, I am that I am." The same statement you will find in Hindu scriptures. Tattvamasi Shvetketu. You are that you are. And God told Moses, just go and tell them that God says, I am that I am. A strange, yet still a statement of great significance. I am that I am. When Jesus or Krishna speaks, they speak from their consciousness. He pours his consciousness into it, he pours his fragrance into it, and when it reaches you, only empty container reaches you, no contents. His spirit is lost on the way. Then a priest or you try to give your meaning to those words. All scriptures function as mirror, wherein you see your own face. And remember, when a monkey looks into the mirror, he cannot find the angel in the reflection. All scriptures function as mirrors, wherein you see only your face. And remember, when a monkey looks into the mirror, he cannot find the angel in the reflection. And so, what happened? This man read many books, listened to many learned persons, discussed intricate matters and practiced. Someone said, made comments on my posts, and I simply responded, "Thanks for your comment. I cannot say anything more than that." He says, if you cannot discuss, then what right do you have to post these things? So what happened? This man read many books, listened to many learned persons, discussed intricate matters and practiced, but doubt remained lurking behind everything he did. This search continued for 20 years. Then he came across, during this search he came across many masters, but none of them could satisfy him. Thus he remained empty and always doubting. And then one day he came across a man who fulfilled his idea, but when he was ready and asked the master to accept him as the disciple, the master says, that I cannot do. I cannot accept you as a disciple. I cannot accept you as a disciple because while you may seek a perfect master, and he in turn requires only the perfect disciple. The master is inquiring, had you prepared yourself to be a disciple? Have you prepared yourself to be a disciple? You came across many times, but you missed each time, and once again you have missed. Such is the Sufi approach to have communion with the master. First seek the master. Remember, master appears when the disciple is ready. The master appears when the disciple is ready. Only this much for this morning. Until tomorrow, take care and do have a pleasant day.